Hello, everyone. My name's Jason, or you could call me Gwaine. This will be IELTS speaking. There are 10 parts to this course. This one is the introduction. Okay, so I've already given kind of a welcome, so welcome again in any case. About me, I've been teaching for many years. I used to teach high school English to native speakers in the US. And I've been in China almost 10 years teaching English to people learning English in China. I worked in training schools and I'm currently working in a university as of releasing this class. That could change, of course, if you end up taking the class later. I'm going to ask you questions throughout this and many other series I might release. And when I ask a question, I'm going to pause for a few seconds. This is a good time for you to maybe look up the answer, maybe even pause the class, because you'll be taking a more active role in the class if you do that, and I think you'll get more out of it. We'll talk about that a little bit more in a second. Also, take notes, right? That's important. It'll help you remember things. When people are studying and they take notes, it really helps them remember better than just listening or even using their cell phone to take pictures. When you take notes, you're imprinting something on your brain. Always be working on your English. That's important. You're taking IELTS for a reason. That's probably because you want to study somewhere where you're going to be learning in English. So knowing English is to your advantage. You should always be working on it. Not 24 hours a day, but dedicate some time every day to working on your English, even if it's just review. And like I said earlier, actively study while doing this course. That means don't just sit in front of your computer. Take an active part in this class. I have taught a number of online classes, but I much prefer being in the classroom, being able to ask questions and have students think and answer questions. Try to pretend that you're in a classroom. Try to answer questions. Of course, you could answer them in your head if you're studying in the library or around other people so that they don't think you're too weird if you want to, but try to answer them. I'll ask a few questions in every class, and then I'll even pause for 5 seconds or so that you can answer them. So I suggest taking notes, answering questions. You can even pause and try to look up the answer. You might not know all the answers. You could guess, or I recommend looking up the answer. Okay, as I stated before, this is a speaking class, so we won't be covering the IELTS writing or any other sections of the IELTS. We're only going to be looking at the speaking for this class. Okay, as stated previously, I will be asking some questions. Since this particular slide is full of questions, that's mostly what I'll be doing. Then we'll discuss some answers. Some of these are quite personal for you, and I won't be able to discuss answers. But we'll talk about these in a little detail in just a little bit. So, have you taken IELTS before? What's your goal, meaning in taking IELTS? What score do you need? What do you think is the best way to study for IELTS? Now, this may seem like it's not quite related, but it is to an extent. What is an acronym? What does IELTS stand for? What does TOEFL stand for? Is it better to take IELTS or TOEFL? Okay, if you have taken IELTS before, you may know some of what I'm about to tell you or a lot of it. This is just an introduction. Even if you've taken it before, I recommend you still pay attention to the rest of this class. You might learn a couple things. And it's good to know your goal and what score you need or you want for IELTS, right? Some people, some students are taking IELTS, they're not sure what they want to do with it. That's okay, but if you do know what university you want to go to and what score they need, that's really good. You could work towards that, and I recommend working towards exceeding that. And we have practice, practice, practice. That involves your English. Practice speaking English. Practice a lot. You don't have to do, like I said earlier, 24 hours a day, but try to practice a lot, not just through this course. Try to practice speaking to your friends in English if they are also studying English. If you have a foreign friend, that's great. Practice with your foreign friend. You could also watch movies and television shows in English. Do anything you can. Now, on the movies and television shows, I think television shows are better because they last longer. They're bigger, right? If you find a particular show you like, maybe some British show or some American show, then uh, and it entertains you, you'll be more willing to watch more of it. Now, I do recommend if you are doing that, that you turn off any subtitles, Chinese or English subtitles. Just practice your listening for that. If you don't know a word or a phrase one of the characters says, then pause and look it up. This will be beneficial towards your English. If you cannot understand anything, then try English subtitles only. If you have Chinese subtitles on, all you're doing is just reading Chinese. You're not practicing your English. So I recommend no subtitles. If you can't do it that way, then I recommend English only. But it's better to really try to watch these with no subtitles. And a minute or so ago, I asked you what an acronym is. It's a type of abbreviation where usually every letter stands for a word. I'll give you an example. ATM, automatic teller machine. That's an acronym. Some people say you need to sound it out, like ASAP, ASAP, which means as soon as possible. Um, but I disagree. ATM is an acronym. USA, United States of America, UK, United Kingdom. These are all acronyms. They're types of abbreviations. An abbreviation is a shortening of a word or phrase. These are types of abbreviation where usually every letter stands for a word. The reason that's relevant is because I asked you, what does IELTS stand for? It stands for International English Language Testing System. And this is IELTS, not TOEFL, but I asked you, what does TOEFL stand for? And that is Test of English as a Foreign Language. So these are two acronyms describing two different types of tests. I also asked you, what's better? Is it better to take IELTS or is it better to take TOEFL? Uh, most people who take these tests think IELTS is easier. So you've probably picked the right one. IELTS is a British test and TOEFL is an American test. They're very different types of tests. I believe that IELTS is easier. Now, you may want to take TOEFL if you want to go to an American university that only accepts TOEFL. But keep in mind, many American universities will also accept IELTS, but not all of them. So if you know what university you want to go to, make sure that they accept IELTS and not TOEFL, because some of them will only accept TOEFL. I don't know the percentage, so I can't tell you, but I do know that a lot of them will accept IELTS. So don't worry so much about TOEFL. Okay, the speaking test is divided up into three parts. Part 1, Part 2, and Part 3. We're going to go over all these parts in much more detail in later classes, but we'll briefly look at them today. So in part one, you will be asked several questions and they're going to be personal. They might be about yourself or your home or your work or your school. When you answer these, try to answer in 4 to 5 sentences. For example, if they ask you if you like your hometown, don't just say yes and think you're done answering, right? If you say yes, explain why you like your hometown, right? Give reasons for it. Try to give 4 to 5 sentences answers for part one. We'll talk more about that at a later time in a later class. Okay, part two. Most students feel that this is the hardest part. I've had a few who, for some reason or other, think maybe part one or part three is harder, but the vast majority of students think this is the hardest part. I have multiple classes on strategies for answering this. You'll be given a piece of paper with a question on it for this one, so that will help you. Also, I didn't note it, but you'll be given 1 minute to prepare for this. They claim that you'll need to talk for 1 to 2 minutes, but usually they're going to make you talk 2 minutes. If you don't answer enough, they might ask you to talk about something else for the 2 minutes. Try to make sure that you could talk for over 2 minutes. When I teach students this on a one-to-one basis, I have them answer part two for 3 minutes. If you could talk for 3 minutes, then you could talk for 2 minutes. That's just in practice, of course. Um, the last part is part three. You're going to be asked several questions. These will be related to your part two question. They have questions they might answer that are directly related to the content of part two. This is almost like a dialogue or a conversation that you're having. So try to treat this naturally like you would speak naturally in this part. When you answer these questions, make them a little bit longer than the part one questions. Try to maybe answer in 5 to 6 sentences for this. If you talk too long, you may be interrupted, but it's much better to talk too long than not long enough. Again, don't just give yes or no answers. Give reasons why. I have some tips for this. These are general tips. I'll be giving a lot more in future classes, but these are just some general ones to cover the IELTS speaking in general, all parts. So again, I'm going to ask you some questions. Is it better to study English in general or specifically IELTS? Is it okay to lie on IELTS, to be untruthful? Should you generalize or stereotype when answering questions on IELTS? This is mostly related to part three, I believe. If you don't know what generalize or stereotype is, it would be a good time to pause and try to look up those answers, or I'm sorry, those vocabulary words. What should you do if you make a grammatical error when speaking? Is it better to use American English or British English, i.e., in the words you use? Should you memorize answers to all part two questions? Okay, so I asked you if it's better to just study English or study IELTS particularly. I would say both, right? I highly recommend improving your overall English and preparing for the test. The reason you're taking this test is because you're going to go study somewhere. Most likely, you're going to go study somewhere, And you need to be able to learn things in English. The professors will be speaking in English, or the teachers will be speaking in English. And I asked, what is the reason you have to pass IELTS? Uh, the reason is these people want you to be able to understand what you're learning, what you're getting, and it's going to be in English. So learning English is important, maybe more important than just being able to pass IELTS, because you want to be able to pass your classes and understand the information being given to you when you're studying abroad. So I recommend, yes, practicing for IELTS, but also working on your English. Earlier I said practice, practice, practice. Do that. Try to do that every day. I don't know, if you have a bad day, take a day off, but try to spend an hour or two just working on English every day. Don't wait to the last minute to study. Don't if you have IELTS test next month and you suddenly bought these classes, they might not help you that much. You need to spend a lot of time working on this, a lot of time practicing. If you wait to the last minute, which many students do, you might want to schedule another exam because you might not do that well. And I recommend doing two exams, right? Having one, then maybe 6 months later, having another, see how much better you do on the second one after you've been thoroughly practicing in those 6 months. You'll see that you'll probably succeed and do much better in the second one. If you're taking this class now and you still have a good 6 months before the exam, that's great. Check your score. See if you need to take it again, if you got the score you need, or if you need to work a little harder on it. Like I said before, more than once, practice, practice, practice. Practice your English, practice IELTS questions. And the questions will change 3 times a year: January, May, and September. I do not recommend practicing all the questions and trying to memorize them. It's too much information. They also might be able to tell you've done that and you might get a lower score. Like I said, the reason they're having you take IELTS is to make sure you could pass your classes, not just memorize information in English, but be able to hold a conversation in English. Lying in general is not a good idea. What do you have to remember if you tell the truth? If you tell the truth, you only have to remember what really happened. What do you have to remember if you lie? If you lie, you have to remember more than what actually happened. You have to remember who you lied to. You have to remember what the lie was. You have to remember to keep up that lie. You have to remember to be able to convince someone of the lie. And if you told person A the truth and you told person B a lie, what if that topic comes up in conversation? What are you going to do? It's much easier to just be able to tell the truth through your life than you only have to remember the truth. You don't remember what you said, who you said it to, why you said it. You don't have to remember all that. However, on IELTS, you may actually have to lie to get a better score. I'm not saying for sure you will, but there's some weird questions there. There's some questions that there's one in particular I never liked, and that was a question that said, tell me about something that's been in your family for generations. And a lot of Chinese students had nothing like that in their family, or maybe their parents did, but they didn't know much about it. I think it's a bad question. But for that, sometimes, for that example, you might have to make something up. But that's also very difficult to do on the spot. It's easier to tell the truth than it is to make up a lie. The truth, you just recount information. A lie, you have to be creative and come up with different things to say. I'm not saying you would always have to lie. There might be an example of what is your favorite sport as a part two question that you have to talk for 2 minutes about. If they ask me that question, I don't really have a favorite sport per se. But I could talk about why I don't really play sports anymore. I did when I was younger, or watch sports. And I could probably talk about that for 2 minutes. But if it's something you know nothing about, um, it might be easier to pretend I like basketball. I like this. I like that. To be able to give a a better answer with a lie. Again, I'm not recommending you always do that. Hopefully, you get through the test without having to do that. But sometimes the easier answer might be to lie. It's really up to you. I recommend not doing it unless you absolutely have to. But again, they're testing you on your English ability, not your truth telling ability. However, don't get caught lying. Um, some students might like to write, they memorize a book that's been turned into a movie. That way, if they're asked about a book, they can talk about it, or if they're asked about a movie, they can talk about it, which maybe is okay, but the interviewer might know both the book and the movie, and he also might know that they're different, right? Sometimes they change the plot quite dramatically when they make a movie. So if you do something like that, make sure you know what happens in the book. Also, the title. I'll give you some examples. Philip K. Dick wrote a book called Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep? Then they made a film called Blade Runner. They changed the story quite a bit in the film, and it's a completely different title. So if you said you read the book Blade Runner, and then you give the information from the movie, they'll know that that's a lie. So don't say anything that you get caught in. Also, if you tell a lie, don't, and they ask you in part three something else related to that, and you change your story, just don't get caught telling a lie. That looks bad. So don't make a mistake when lying, especially about the things the examiner might know you're lying about. Okay, I hope you looked up what generalizing or stereotyping means. Basically, right, if you generalize, you're throwing people into a group and you're describing them all the same, and you're not looking at their individual personalities or characteristics. I'm not fond of some of the questions on IELTS, and this is a lot of part three stuff usually. They'll say, do people in your country do this? Or do Chinese people do this? I don't recommend saying yes or no. I recommend pointing out that the question is trying to generalize a group of people. Yeah, sure. For example, I could say the U.S. is a Christian nation because over half the people in the U.S. are Christian, but not all people. I'm not Christian. So I don't like doing that. I don't like generalizing or stereotyping. They might say, right, do people in your country think it's better to buy a home or rent a home? A good way to answer that is maybe start with, I don't know everyone in my country. People are different, they have their own personalities. I would say traditionally it was encouraged that people buy their own home when they start a family. But these days, a lot of younger people aren't interested in owning their own home. A lot of them think it's easier to rent. That way, they could get up and leave if they find another job in a different part of the city, or if they have some children and the place is too small. There's many reasons people might want to move. So you could try to answer it like that. Or you could say, some people do this, some people do that. I really don't like those types of questions. It's difficult to talk about a whole culture, say everyone does this or everyone does that. And it will show an advanced level of English if you explain that you can't answer for an entire culture or group of people. It'll make you look smarter instead of just saying Chinese people do this, Chinese people do that, people in my country do this. Now let's look at these two questions. Which is better? All Chinese people love rice, or many Chinese people eat rice? Okay, of course, the second one is better, right? All Chinese people love rice. That's not true. That's stereotyping or generalizing. I know several Chinese people who don't like rice, don't want to eat rice. It's a regional thing, which areas of the country eat more rice than other areas. And I know several Chinese people who don't like rice and they don't eat rice. So, a better way to say it, many Chinese people eat rice, right? That's true. A lot of Chinese people eat rice. You're avoiding extremes like all or none, and also extremes like love or hate. It's unnecessary to say. Even people, some people who eat rice, they don't love it. They maybe think it's okay, or they just eat it because it's a staple part of the foods. But to say they eat it is better than to say they love it, and many is better than saying all. So try not to. It'll make your English look much better if you don't generalize or stereotype. So I asked you, if you make a mistake, what should you do? Oh, the answer is immediately correct. Any mistake that you make. Mistakes happen, right? Even myself, I make mistakes when speaking English, and it's my native language. Everyone makes mistakes, right? You might accidentally use the wrong word, or mid sentence, you might change what you're trying to say, and it comes out strangely. That's okay. You probably make mistakes when speaking Chinese. You might start out trying to say one thing, you accidentally say something else, or you use the wrong word. Mistakes happen, not that big a deal. Um, but make sure you correct them, right? If you make too many mistakes, yes, it might lower your score, but make sure you correct all of them because it's still better that the interviewer knows that you know you made a mistake and you fixed it than for you to make a mistake and just continue talking because you feel you're running out of time. Then they might think you don't know the correct grammar. A big problem a lot of Chinese students have is their pronouns, getting he and she mixed up, right? My mother, he is a good cook. That's wrong because your mother's female, so she should be she. If you catch yourself making mistakes, and my mother, he's a good cook. I'm sorry, I mean my mother, she is a good cook. Correct yourself immediately so they know that you know the correct way to speak and that you just made a mistake. It's much better than just pressing on, knowing you made a mistake. That will really count against you because they'll think you don't know how to speak the language correctly. Okay, this part is maybe a little controversial. I just know human nature, so let me get through this, then I'll add some things at the end. Okay, so do you know the differences between American English and British English? That's all the same language, right? So it's not two separate languages. I'm just describing the people speaking it. Sometimes Americans and British people have different words for different things or different pronunciation for different things. Um, all right, let's just talk about this. IELTS is a British test, so use British words if you know them. Gasoline versus petrol. Petrol's British. Soccer versus football. Football's British. Right? Americans say soccer. And this word here. How do Americans and British pronounce this word? Tomato. Americans say tomato. British say tomato. On one level, it's not that big a deal. And I'll give you a quick side note. For writing, right, there's also some words that British people spell differently than Americans. Uh, Color versus color. Americans might say Color. British might spell it Clour. Right, that's a side note because we're talking about speaking, not necessarily writing here. Now, the official stance of IELTS is that it's okay. Some areas of China, they were taught more American English. Other areas of China were taught more British English. So, the official stance of IELTS is that it's fine. If you have more American English, that's fine, but stick to the American English. If you have more British English, that's fine, but stick to the British English. Remain consistent, right? If you start with using American words, then continue using American words. If you start using British words, then continue using British words. Now, I suggest if you know both, you go the British route. And that's just because I know people. And, most British people are great people, but I've met some that don't like Americans. And they don't like the way Americans speak. And they should not judge you for this, but it doesn't mean they won't. I met teachers who don't like students, and they'll lower their score because they don't like them. They feel they've been personally attacked by the students saying some things in class. And yes, if it's part of the score to take away points for bad behavior, that's fine. But if it's not part of the score, people are people. And I'm not saying you'll be judged on this at all. I'm just saying if you know the British words, it's better to use the British words. It's better to be safe than sorry. They do have Americans testing you, right? But if you get a British person who doesn't like Americans, they should not judge you, but they might. I just know people, and it's not all people, it's a small number of people, but they get very judgmental. And some people won't agree with what I'm saying, but I know people like this. So I just recommend, if you know the British and the American ways to speak, I recommend going more British if you're taking IELTS, going more American if you're taking TOEFL. That's just a suggestion. If you're not sure, then just stick with what you know. But remember, right, if you start speaking American English, continue speaking American English. If you start speaking British English, continue speaking British English. I recommend you do not try to memorize all answers to the questions in part two. As I told you earlier, the questions change 3 times a year, right? Often, if your language is not sophisticated enough, the interviewer will be able to tell that you attempted to memorize an answer. Um, it's kind of easy. Now, if you're very good, maybe not so easy. But often, you could tell when someone tried to memorize an answer because the way they spoke so well through part two and so poorly through part one and three, it's easy to tell sometimes. And remember, if you're attending a school in a foreign country, you need to be able to understand the content when it's presented in English. So memorizing things isn't always great for your English. Memorizing entire answers, that won't help you when you're in university, right? Learning your subject in English. Now, it's okay to practice current IELTS questions. I would just suggest don't try. If you could find the questions that you know they're asking in this season or this part of the year, it's fine to practice those. You might get something out of it and it might benefit you a little bit more than just practicing things in general. And some people disagree with me. A lot of Chinese teachers who teach IELTS think it's a good idea to try to memorize the questions. I'm not a big fan of that. Okay, guys, so we're going to go into greater detail on some of these tips in later lessons. This was just an introduction of what to expect on IELTS and a little bit what to expect through the next 9 classes of this course. In the next lesson, we're going to begin to look in depth at Part 2 questions. We're going to have several classes on Part 2, and I like to start with Part 2 because some of the tips, some of the ways to prepare for Part 2 might also help you with 1 and 3. And actively study, practice, practice, practice. You'll get out of these classes what you put into studying. Don't just sit there and passively look at these classes and think you're going to do well. Take notes, practice, study. Just taking these classes and having the information enter your ears it's not going to help you. You have to actively work at this, okay? And thanks again, guys, so much. Thank you for taking these courses, and I'll see you in the next class. All right. Bye-bye.